All right, everyone, buckle up, because today we're diving headfirst into something really fascinating. We're heading over to Jamaica to check out this whole journey they're on to create a brand new constitution.
And you might be thinking, hold on a sec, don't they already have one? They've been independent since 62. And you're not wrong. But that's the thing about constitutions.
They're not exactly what you'd call set in stone, huh?
Exactly. Jamaica's story is actually a perfect example of that. See, even after, what is it, more than 60 years of independence, their constitution is, well, technically still based on this British law, an order in council.
It's kind of like having the most important document about who you are, but it's written in someone else's words, isn't it?
Exactly. And that's exactly why they've decided time for a rewrite.
Okay, but where do you even start with something like that? How do you create a constitution that truly reflects an entire nation?
Well, Jamaica decided to tackle this head on. They formed this thing called the Constitutional Reform Committee, the CRC for short.
Yeah.
Right. Think of them as this team of architects, but instead of buildings, they're carefully redesigning the entire blueprint of how Jamaica is governed.
Sounds like a pretty big job.
Massive, which is why they've broken it down into phases. And lucky for us, today we're diving deep into phase one, where all the most urgent and honestly the most exciting changes are happening.
All right, so spill the tea. What's phase one all about?
They're calling it Jamaicanization.
Which, I gotta say, sounds pretty self-explanatory. But I'm guessing it goes a bit deeper than just finding and replacing a few British-sounding words here and there.
You hit the nail on the head. Jamaicanization for them is about truly owning their narrative. It's about moving away from that British order in council and creating a document that is, from top to bottom, genuinely Jamaican.
It's a powerful statement when you think about it, you know? A nation standing up and saying, this is our story, and we're going to tell it our way.
It really is.
So how are they going about this? What exactly is changing?
Well, one of the big proposed changes is adding a preamble to their constitution. You know, those inspiring opening lines that set the tone for everything that follows.
Oh, I do love a good preamble. It's like the grand entrance for a really important speech, you know?
Yeah.
Sets the stage, gets you pumped for what's to come.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really interesting. The CRC couldn't actually agree on which preamble to use.
Wait, seriously? How many are we talking?
They have 8 options on the table right now, each one reflecting a different piece of Jamaica's identity, hopes, dreams, you name it.
Wow, 8 different preambles.
Mm.
Talk about pressure to pick the right words. So how are they planning on narrowing it down?
Well, get this. They're proposing to create a whole committee of poets, musicians, writers, the works.
Oh, I love that. It's like they're saying, this is bigger than just legal jargon. We need to capture the very soul of Jamaica in these words.
Exactly. And the coolest part, it really shows how seriously they're taking this whole process, don't you think?
100%. But it's not just about the words themselves, is it? They're really looking at everything.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, they're taking a good hard look at all of Jamaica's national symbols, like their coat of arms, to see if they really reflect the vibrant modern nation Jamaica has become.
Now, that is fascinating. Makes you think, what images do represent a nation? You know, like, should it be symbols passed down through history or something totally new, something that resonates with people today?
It's a question a lot of nations grapple with as they grow and change. And speaking of big changes, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or maybe the lion in the room, in this case, Jamaica becoming a republic.
Okay, now that is a big one. I mean, we are talking about a fundamental shift in how Jamaica sees itself on the world stage. No more queen as head of state. Instead, they'll have a president of Jamaica.
You know, but when I hear president, I immediately think big Oval Office, tons of power, you know?
You and me both.
But something tells me it's not quite that simple in this case. You'd be right to question that. The
Right.
CRC actually looked at 2 different models for this whole presidency thing. The first one is that executive presidency, the one you're probably picturing with all the power, and then there's the non-executive presidency.
Which I'm guessing is more, what, ceremonial?
Exactly. Think figurehead, symbol of national unity, that kind of thing.
Okay, so which way are they leaning?
They ended up recommending the non-executive model, similar to the role their governor general has right now.
Interesting. So why go for a less powerful president? Were there a lot of strong opinions about it?
Oh, absolutely. People were fired up on both sides. Knowing your love for a good debate, I think you'll appreciate this. The folks who were all for that executive president model, they felt like it would give Jamaica a much stronger, more independent presence on the world stage. You know, someone who could make those big decisions quickly.
Makes sense. And what about the other side? Why were they so against it?
Those who were backing the non-executive president idea, which remember is what the CRC ultimately recommended well, they felt it was a much better way to keep things stable. Their argument was that it would help preserve Jamaica's parliamentary democracy, making sure no single person has too much power.
Checks and balances.
Yeah.
It's all about checks and balances, making sure no one person or group can run the show on their own. I'm into it.
Exactly.
So let's say they do go with having a president. How do they choose one? Another election to add to the calendar.
Actually, it's a bit more complex than that. They came up with this two-stage process, nomination and confirmation.
Two parts. Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me the rundown.
Okay, so picture this. The prime minister, they get to put forward a nominee, but, and it's big but, they have to chat with the leader of the opposition first.
So it's all about collaboration from the get-go. I like it. Finding that middle ground. What happens next?
Next up, Parliament. The nominee goes to both houses of Parliament for confirmation, and we're not talking a simple majority here. They need a two-thirds majority vote in both houses.
Wow, two-thirds. That's serious. They're really making sure that whoever becomes president has the support of most of the country.
Exactly. It's about uniting the nation, not deepening any divides, right? And on top of that whole process, they've also put a lot of thought into who can even be president in the first place. Obviously, you have to be Jamaican.
Well, yeah.
Of course. But it gets interesting when you ask, okay, but how Jamaican do you need to be?
Right. Like, are we talking about a recent connection to Jamaica or family roots that go way back?
That is the question.
Yeah.
They ended up requiring Jamaican citizenship, either by birth or by descent, but the descent part is limited to 3 generations. Basically, at least one of your grandparents has to have been born in Jamaica.
It's fascinating how these conversations about changing a nation's rules really make you think about your own identity, huh?
Totally.
Okay, so we've covered Jamaicanizing the Constitution, waving goodbye to the monarchy, and welcoming a president. What else is on the table in this constitutional makeover?
Well, they're giving Parliament a little makeover too, especially the Senate. Some interesting tweaks to how it operates.
Hold on, remind me. The Senate, that's basically Jamaica's version of like a House of Lords or a Senate like we see in other places,
Well,
right?
got it. It's
Yeah.
that second chamber in their parliament, and it has a super important job reviewing and passing laws.
Right, got it.
Okay.
Okay, so what kind of makeover are we talking about here? Give me the good stuff.
Well, first off, they're talking about adding more senators, fresh perspectives, but here's the big one. They're thinking about adding what they're calling independent senators.
Okay, now that's interesting. What exactly does independent mean in this context? Are these just people who don't like to pick sides?
Basically, yeah, these are people who aren't tied to any political party.
Ooh, now that is interesting. Why is that a big deal? What's the thinking there?
See, up until now, the Senate's mostly been made up of folks appointed by, you guessed it, the prime minister and the leader of the opposition, adding independent senators. It's like bringing in a whole new level of, wait a minute, is this really the best choice?
I love it. It's all about making sure the decisions being made are actually good for the nation, not just good for one political party or another.
Exactly. More voices, different viewpoints, always a good recipe.
Couldn't agree more. So, more voices, new perspectives. Got it. Anything else?
Oh, yeah, there's another fascinating discussion happening around who can even be a member of parliament. Right now, you don't actually have to be a Jamaican citizen to get a seat in their parliament.
Wait, seriously? You can be a citizen of another country, but you have a say in how Jamaica's run.
Wild, right? As long as you're a citizen of a Commonwealth country, and let's be honest, that covers a lot of ground, and you've lived in Jamaica for a certain amount of time, you're eligible. But the CRC is suggesting they change that. They're saying Jamaican citizenship should be required for all members of parliament.
Wow. Okay, that is a big shift. What's the reasoning there?
Well, it goes back to that whole idea of national identity and self-determination we were talking about earlier. It's about prioritizing the voices of the people who are directly affected by how Jamaica's run.
So they're saying if you're going to help steer the ship, you got to be fully on board with where it's headed, which makes sense. But it does raise some interesting questions, What about folks who have dual citizenship? People who feel a strong connection to both Jamaica and another country.
It's a really complex issue when you think about it. It really makes you think about how we define identity and belonging in this globalized world, doesn't it?
It really does. And speaking of complex issues with, global implications, there's
Yeah.
one more biggie we got to talk about, Jamaica's final court of appeal.
Ooh, yeah, this is where things get juicy.
Right. I feel like this one's going to spark some serious debate.
Big time. So it all boils down to this: should Jamaica stick with the UK-based Privy Council, which, by the way, has been their highest court since way back when, or should they make the switch to the Caribbean Court of Justice, usually called the CCJ?
Okay, so it's a classic case of tradition versus change. On the one hand, you've got this well-established court steeped in history. And on the other hand, you've got this newer institution with, I'm guessing, a more regional focus. So what are people saying about this? What are the arguments on each side?
Well, the folks who are all about sticking with the Privy Council, they always bring up its long history of fairness and impartiality. They see it as a known entity, a symbol of stability and continuity in the legal world. There's also this idea that having your final court outside of the Caribbean region adds this extra layer of protection, like it guards against any potential bias or undue influence that might pop up closer to home.
So it's about making sure that the highest legal decisions in Jamaica are made purely on the facts of the case, without any pressure or influence from within the Caribbean region.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a pretty strong argument. Now, what about the other side? Why are some people so adamant that Jamaica should make the move to the CCJ?
For them, it's all about embracing a Caribbean identity, legally speaking, of course. Their argument is that the CCJ, because it's rooted in the Caribbean, has a better understanding of the social, cultural, and legal landscape.
It's like having a court that speaks your language, legally and culturally.
Right. They argue that the CCJ would be much better equipped to handle cases that are really ingrained in the realities of life in the Caribbean.
It makes you think about all the things a court considers. It's not just about laws on paper. It's about understanding the culture, the unspoken rules, all the things that make a place unique.
100%. And on top of all that, there's also the practicality of it all. The CCJ is literally closer, and that could potentially mean a faster and cheaper appeals process for everyone involved.
Makes sense. Jetting off to the other side of the world to have your case heard can't be cheap or easy. So both sides bring some strong arguments to the table. So where does that leave the CRC? Have they made up their minds about this final court of appeal thing?
Well, here's where it gets extra interesting. The CRC actually decided not to make a specific recommendation about the final court of appeal.
They're staying neutral.
It seems like it. They're probably aware of how strongly people feel on both sides. This whole final court of appeal thing has become a bit of a political hot potato.
Ooh, yeah, I can see how that would make things tricky. You don't want to be seen as choosing sides in a debate like that. But it does make you wonder, if they can't even agree on a recommendation for something as important as the final court of appeal, how likely is it that any of these proposed changes are actually going to happen?
Right. I mean, it's not like changing the font on a document. It's a constitution.
It's a big deal.
Exactly. It's a whole process, right?
So how does something like this happen? How does Jamaica actually go about making these changes official?
Well, first off, it's super important to remember that Jamaica is a sovereign nation. They have the power to make these changes, if that's what they want. But, and it's a big but, there are a few hurdles to overcome, a few hoops to jump through.
Government hurdles, gotta love them.
Tell me about it, especially for those really big changes like becoming a republic or restructuring parliament.
So what's the biggest hoop?
The referendum.
Of course. It all comes back to the people.
Right. It's about the will of the people. And in Jamaica's constitution, they have these things called deeply entrenched provisions, which are basically the big foundational rules of the game. You want to change those, you got to ask the people directly.
Direct democracy in action. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. The power rests with the people. It really highlights that democracy isn't just some abstract idea.
It's about actively shaping your future.
Right. Okay, so referendum, got it.
Yeah.
What else? What else does the CRC have to do to make sure these changes become a reality?
Well, throughout this whole process, they've been super focused on public education.
Making sure everyone understands the issues, right?
Exactly. Because when it's time for that referendum, they want to make sure people aren't just voting on some abstract idea of change. They want them to be voting on a future they actually understand and want to be a part of.
Knowledge is power. Or in this case, knowledge equals a stronger, more representative democracy. But even with all the best education campaigns in the world, getting everyone on the same page about something as big as changing a constitution, that's got to be tough.
Yeah, tough might be an understatement. It's a huge undertaking. But that's kind of the beauty of it all, isn't it? It's not about pretending everyone has to agree on everything. It's about creating space for those different opinions, those different visions of what Jamaica's future could look like.
It's about finding a way forward that works for everyone. A path forward that truly represents what the Jamaican people want. And that, I'm guessing, doesn't happen overnight.
It's a journey. And it's one that a lot of us, even those of us who aren't Jamaican, are watching with a lot of interest.
Oh, absolutely. Because the decisions they make in the coming months, in the coming years, as they're figuring out this whole new constitution thing.
It's going to have a huge impact